Eli Warner had always said the lake knew him. Every Saturday before dawn, he drove his rusted blue truck up the winding road to Mirror Lake, a quiet, glassy body of water deep in northern Minnesota, where the mist rose thick as breath and the trees leaned so close their reflections seemed to whisper in the ripples. He'd been fishing there since he was a boy. Now 43, divorced, and living alone, the lake was the one place that still felt like his. He'd tell people at the diner, "That lake listens when no one else does." They'd laugh, call him poetic, but Eli meant it. Out there, in the hush before sunrise, he could talk to the stillness, about the things he'd lost, about how his daughter wouldn't return his calls, about the way his house seemed to echo differently since she moved out. That Saturday morning in early June, the water was smoother than he'd ever seen it. No wind, no frogs. Even the loons were silent. Eli took it as a sign of a good day. He pushed his small aluminum boat off the shore, the old motor sputtering once before catching, and drifted out toward the middle, humming to himself. He always sat in the same spot, a quiet patch near the western bend, where a half-submerged tree jutted from the water like a finger pointing toward the sky. He cast his line, opened his thermos of coffee, and settled in. For the first hour, everything was perfectly ordinary. The sun climbed, burning off the fog. The water gleamed gold. Eli watched dragonflies hover above the surface, tiny flashes of light darting across the reflection. He thought about calling his daughter again that afternoon, maybe sending a text first, just to test the waters. He was rebaiting his hook when he noticed it, a ripple far out, near the northern end. It wasn't wind, the air was dead still. The disturbance moved in a perfect, slow circle, then stopped. Eli squinted. Probably a muskie, he thought, or a snapping turtle. He waited. The surface smoothed again. He took a sip of coffee and tried to shake the unease that crept up his spine. For a moment he thought he saw something beneath his reflection, not movement exactly, but the faintest suggestion of a shape, darker than the water, just below his boat. When he leaned forward, the image dissolved into ripples. Eli frowned and chuckled under his breath. "You're losing it, man." He cast again, but something about the quiet didn't feel right anymore. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. Around 9, another boat appeared across the lake, a small white one with a single figure standing inside. The distance made it hard to see, but the man seemed still. Not fishing, not moving, just standing. Eli raised a hand, but the figure didn't wave back. When he blinked, the man was gone. The white boat remained, rocking slightly. He stared for a long minute, the chill crawling up his arms despite the sunlight. Then he forced a laugh, muttering, "Fog tricks. Always fog tricks." Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the lake was watching him watch it. At lunch, he pulled ashore and sat on a log to eat his sandwich. His mind wandered back to that white boat. When he looked again, it had drifted closer, maybe 20 yards nearer. He hadn't seen it move. Eli took a slow breath, tried to think rationally. Maybe it was someone's unattended vessel adrift. Maybe there was no one there at all. But when he raised his binoculars, he saw him, the same man, now sitting perfectly still in the bow. Pale skin, wet clothes, face turned toward Eli. And he was smiling. Eli dropped the binoculars. The lenses clinked against a rock. He stood there, heart thudding, staring back at the water. The boat was empty again. He didn't fish much after that. He just sat there listening. The gentle lap of the water against the hull began to sound almost like whispering, low, drawn-out syllables he couldn't make out. He thought of packing up, but a part of him, the part that had always loved this place, told him to wait. Maybe he was tired. Maybe the reflections were playing tricks again. Still, he couldn't help but glance over his shoulder every few seconds, expecting to see that boat again. By the time he headed home, the air had turned heavy and gray. The surface of the lake was dark as glass. He looked back one last time before climbing into his truck, and there, right where his boat had been anchored all day, he saw it, a pale hand breaking the surface, fingers curling upward, before slipping silently back beneath. Eli didn't tell anyone about it. Not at the diner, not his daughter. He convinced himself it was debris, driftwood, something explainable. But that night, as he washed his hands at the kitchen sink, He noticed the faint smell of lake water clinging to his skin, cold, metallic, and deep. And when he looked up at the window above the sink, he could have sworn there was a reflection behind his own. A face, smiling, watching, from somewhere far below the surface. Eli didn't go back to Mirror Lake the next weekend. He told himself it was because of work, a double shift at the mill, a few home repairs he'd been putting off. But really, it was the reflection in the kitchen window that kept replaying in his mind. The pale, wet face that had smiled just a second too long before fading. He tried to shake it. He told himself it was stress. Too much caffeine. Lack of sleep. But as the week dragged on, little things started happening. Things that didn't feel like coincidence. The sound of dripping water in the hallway, though the pipes were dry. The faint scent of algae in his bedroom, like rotting leaves and mud. And every night, just as he began to drift off, he'd hear the slow, steady creak of oars dipping into water, faint, rhythmic, impossibly far away, yet unmistakable. By Friday, he'd had enough. "You're not scared of a damn lake," he muttered to his reflection. But even as he said it, he noticed a strange shimmer behind his own image, a dark blur that seemed to rise behind him, like something surfacing. He spun around. Nothing. That Saturday, he packed up early and drove back to Mirror Lake. He told himself he needed to prove it was just his imagination. The air was colder than before, unseasonably so for June. A gray haze clung to the treetops. The water looked different too, darker, thicker, as if holding its breath. When he reached the dock, he noticed something odd. A small pile of wet footprints leading from the shoreline to the boathouse. Bare feet. He crouched down, touching the prints. The water was icy. Fresh. He thought about leaving right then. But pride is a dangerous thing, especially for men who've spent their whole lives talking to lakes. So Eli pushed the boat into the water and set off toward his usual spot. As the motor hummed, he scanned the surface. No white boat. No reflection that didn't belong. For a moment, he felt foolish for being afraid. He baited his hook, cast his line, and let the stillness settle around him. That's when he heard it. A splash, soft but heavy, behind him. He turned. Nothing. Just ripples spreading outward, slow and deliberate. Then another sound, closer this time. A soft knock against the hull, like a hand brushing metal. Eli froze. He leaned over the edge, peering into the water. It was too dark to see far, but he thought he saw movement. Something pale, drifting just below the surface. He grabbed his flashlight, shone it downward. The beam cut through the murk, and for a split second, he saw it. A face, pale, eyeless, floating inches beneath him, lips moving soundlessly. Eli recoiled, dropping the light into the lake. The water swallowed it with a dull glug. He sat trembling, staring into the rippling void where the face had been. Minutes passed. He started to convince himself it had been a trick of the light, his reflection distorted. Maybe exhaustion, maybe sun glare. Then he heard the whisper. Soft, wet, close. Eli. The sound came from beneath the boat. He scrambled for the motor, yanking the cord. It sputtered once, twice, then died. The boat rocked gently. Another whisper. Louder. Come back. The words were bubbling, warped by water, but he heard them clearly. His heart pounded in his chest. Who's there? He shouted, his voice cracking in the stillness. The lake answered with silence, then a slow ripple from beneath the bow. He leaned over once more, and this time, something brushed his hand. Cold, soft, human. Eli jerked back, nearly capsizing the boat. He fumbled for the oar, paddling frantically toward shore. The water behind him began to churn, violently, as if something massive was rising from below. By the time he reached the dock, he was soaked and shaking. He didn't even pull the boat out, just stumbled to his truck and drove home, gasping for air. That night, he couldn't sleep. He could still feel that cold touch on his skin. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that face beneath the water. Around midnight, the phone rang. He hesitated before picking up. A faint hiss on the other end, like waves lapping against metal. Then a low voice whispered, "You left me." Eli dropped the phone. It clattered against the floor, the dial tone humming like a heartbeat. He stood frozen, the realization sinking in like a stone in deep water. Because that voice, that whisper, he knew it. It was his brother's, the one who drowned in Mirror Lake 20 years ago. Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat in his living room with the lights on, the phone lying in pieces on the floor. Every creak of the house made him flinch. Every passing car's reflection across the window looked like movement from the dark outside. He couldn't get the voice out of his head. That slow, watery whisper. You left me. It couldn't have been him. His brother, Aaron, had drowned when they were teenagers. The search team said they never found the body. The current too strong, the lake too deep. Eli remembered standing on that same dock, his mother's sobs echoing behind him as divers surfaced empty-handed. For years he'd told himself it wasn't his fault. But guilt doesn't rot quietly. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He was going back. Not to fish, to end it. To face whatever was in that lake once and for all. He drove through the mist as the first light broke through the trees. The air was thick, pressing against the windshield. His headlights caught shapes that weren't quite branches, crooked, dripping silhouettes that disappeared when he blinked. When he reached Mirror Lake, the world was silent. No birds, no wind, just the steady lap of black water against the dock. His boat was still there, floating where he'd left it. But the motor, it was gone. The metal mount hung empty, slick with algae. Someone, or something, had taken it. He hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The lake accepted the weight with a low groan, ripples spreading outward in slow rings. He picked up the paddle and began to row, each stroke sounding like a heartbeat in the stillness. Halfway to the western bend, he felt it again, that pull beneath the water, subtle but insistent, as though the lake itself were tugging him closer to its center. And then he saw the white boat, the same one from before, drifting slowly toward him. But now he could see clearly. Someone sat in it. A man, pale, motionless. As the boats neared, the figure turned its head. It was Aaron. The face was sunken, the eyes hollowed black, the lips pale and split. But it was him, his younger brother, exactly as Eli remembered him from that day, except for the water dripping endlessly from his skin. Eli's throat tightened. Aaron. The figure tilted its head. When it spoke, the words bubbled up like air from deep below. You said you'd hold the rope. Eli's hands trembled. I did. I tried, Aaron. The current. You let go. Eli shook his head violently, tears spilling down his face. It wasn't my fault. You slipped, I couldn't. The figure smiled, the same way it had in the reflection that first day. The lake around them began to move, swirling, darkening. Beneath the surface, something vast shifted, like a body turning in sleep. Aaron's voice came again, layered now, like multiple voices speaking through water. You left me in the dark. You left me with them. Eli's breath came in short, shallow bursts. He glanced over the side and froze. Hands, dozens of them, pale and dripping, were reaching up from below, pressing against the bottom of the boat. Fingertips dragged along the metal, leaving streaks of slime. He tried to paddle away, but the water was thick, resisting him, clutching at the oar. Then one hand broke the surface, gripping his wrist. The touch was ice cold. Let go of me, he shouted, pulling back. But the grip only tightened. More hands followed, pulling at the sides, dragging the boat down inch by inch. Eli fought, thrashing wildly. He reached for the knife on his belt and slashed at the water. The blade cut nothing but ripples. Aaron's voice rose above the sound of the lake, calm and endless. Come back with me, brother. It's better below. It's quiet there. Eli's mind raced, flashes of that summer 20 years ago. The rope, the sudden pull, his fingers slipping, the scream. The bubbles rising where his brother vanished. He'd run home that day before anyone could see. He'd told them Aaron had fallen. He'd never told anyone about the argument, about the shove. The truth hit him like a current, heavy, unrelenting. This wasn't the lake's curse. It was his own. Please, he whispered, tears mixing with the spray of the water. I'm sorry. For a moment, the hands paused. The water stilled. Then, slowly, Aaron smiled again. But this time it wasn't cruel. It was sad. You can't take back what sinks. The lake erupted. The boat flipped, throwing Eli into the black. Cold swallowed him whole. He thrashed, reaching for light, for air, but all he found were faces in the dark. Dozens of them, pale and waiting, eyes open but sightless. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering his name as they pulled him deeper. He tried to scream, but the water filled his lungs. The last thing he saw before the world went black was his brother's reflection, hovering above him, looking down with pity. Then silence. Only the lake remained. They found Eli Warner's truck 2 days later, parked neatly beside the dock, key still in the ignition, lunchbox on the passenger seat. The boat was gone. So was Eli. At first, the sheriff figured it for an accident. The man was known around town as quiet, steady, maybe a little lonely, sure, but not the sort to lose control. The locals all knew Mirror Lake was unpredictable. People said it had deep spots where the bottom dropped off suddenly, where currents moved like invisible hands. A fall, a bump on the head, that's all it took. They dragged the lake for a week. Nothing. Just the boat, half submerged, drifting near the western bend. The strange part wasn't that the motor was missing, or that the hull was scratched to hell. It was that the inside was bone dry, not a drop of water, as if it hadn't touched the surface in years. And on the seat, carved into the metal with something sharp, they found 3 words. "You left me." The sheriff didn't mention that part in his report. He just told the paper it was an unfortunate drowning. But people talk, especially in towns, where everyone knows everyone else. A week later, old Mrs. Kinsey, who ran the diner Eli used to eat at, swore she saw his reflection in her window one night after closing. Said he was standing out by the lake road, soaked to the bone, just staring at the water. When she blinked, he was gone, but there were wet footprints leading toward the treeline. A few fishermen stopped going to Mirror Lake after that, the ones who didn't started bringing salt with them, sprinkling it at the edge of their boats, just in case. They say if you fish there at dawn, when the mist is thick and the surface looks like glass, you might see another reflection behind your own, a second face, pale and watching. And if you hear your name whispered in the water, you don't look down, because that's how the lake remembers you. It keeps what's given. It calls back what's owed. And some debts, like guilt, like grief, don't stay buried for long. Every autumn since, a single white boat has been seen drifting across Mirror Lake. No one's ever seen who rows it, but locals swear they can hear a man humming softly from within the fog. If you follow the sound long enough, they say, you'll start to hear a second voice join in, quiet or younger. 2 brothers, finally together. But if you ask me, there's something worse in that story than ghosts or drownings. It's the thought that maybe the lake doesn't punish. Maybe it forgives. And forgiveness, in a place that deep, in water that dark, means you never come back up.